To those who live in the Baltic states of Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania, the Soviet era is often seen as an occupation. The Soviet government deported hundreds of thousands of Latvians, Lithuanians, and Estonians to Siberia in the 1940s. This is a period of history we know much about. Conversely, what we know very little about is the history and experiences of disabled people across the USSR. Now, we can certainly infer how they may have lived, given that many Soviet cities did not have things like audible crosswalks or sloped sidewalks. As a visually impaired content creator, I became interested in this because I felt a question of, how were people like me treated during this time period? What I came across was quite surprising. The village of Strazdmuiza in northern Riga, near the border with the surrounding county, is home to a medieval manor, which is probably the only hit you're going to get in English when you try to search this place. And it's also home to a very unique, in my opinion, experiment in urban design. According to an article I read from FK Magazine, written by Gunta Podina in 2012, during the Soviet era, Latvia supported an industrial infrastructure where the blind residents of the village worked in local factories making cleaning brushes and timber cabinets for sale in the Soviet economy. During its height in the 1950s and 60s, local factories supported over 1,600 employees, of whom almost half were blind or visually impaired. With such a high concentration of people with visual impairments, the government couldn't simply lay down a couple Khrushchevkas and be done with it, as was the case with most industrialized cities of the USSR at this time. These people needed more amenities, more accessible features of where they lived, and so the government invested and paths were developed in the woodlands to help people navigate. Curbs were made tactile so that people could feel when they are crossing onto a roadway. The crosswalks, the signs, were made audible so that people could hear when it was safe to cross, if they could not already hear from the traffic. It's these small details that are often missed in the wider conversation around how blind and visually impaired people navigate. These amenities are in stark contrast to the typical Soviet city of their day, such as Chelyabinsk, for example. There's a common perception of blind and visually impaired people, at least in North America, that we either work in entertainment or we don't. People like Ray Charles, or a more modern example, I guess, being Pete Gustin, the blind surfer and voice actor. The fact is, blind people can do many different types of jobs, and the Soviet Latvian government apparently felt that blind and visually impaired people were capable of making cabinets and other joinery, something that I wouldn't even expect. I wonder how they made those places accessible for people to work in, although that's obviously a different discussion. This community, to me, is a window into aspect of history that we just don't know a whole lot about. To me, the community shows that you don't really need millions of people to make a city accessible. What you need is just to listen to the people who those accessible features would need to cater to people. Today, the community is much smaller at around 200, but there are still social events and there are still services for things like Braille and other life skills that a blind or visually impaired person would need. the Latvian Society of the Blind actually has a Strazdmuiza union, which helps people specifically in this part of Riga, or is centered in this part of Riga. Humans are resilient creatures, and blindness is a spectrum. Blindness does not cut you off from communication with other people. It simply means that you can't see them. As the article I originally found from FK Magazine noted, there are people who play accordion. There's a radio station run by volunteers in the village, and one young man was trying to become a mechanic. People find a way to thrive and survive, even if they can't see that well. And I think that's admirable. Some of the photos you've seen in this piece were from a photojournalist set by Gunta Podina called Go Down That Road. A link to this photojournalist piece is in the description below. I want to thank Gunta Podina for giving me permission to use the photos that you have seen today. I also wish to sincerely thank Calvis for taking time to go and find footage for this piece. Without it, you would not be able to enjoy as much of it as you are today. So thank you, Calvis. Thank you, Gunta. If you liked today's piece, I would encourage you to look at the video I made on the Sopot Song Contest, the Eurovision equivalent in the Eastern Bloc and socialist world. I found it another interesting little tidbit of history. I hope that you learned something today, and I will catch you in the next one.